Okay, so let's just review this a little bit. So we're doing the day action program. We want to have these different so-called states. We're going to encapsulate our prediction algorithm in a function. We're going to make a function. Um, and it's going to return the state. In other words, it's going to return one of these outputs. Uh, and then he says, well, how do we represent these states in our function? Um, can we use it? What VB variable could we use? Well, we want a variable that will uh, maybe just output only these. So this is one way, as I said before, this is one way to do this. So he says, well, why don't we just use an integer? Problem is, how do we conveniently maybe use an integer? But we want to limit the values to an allowed range to prevent returning bad values that don't correspond to any action. For example, maybe we only want to have 8 different values, but so suppose we used 0 through 7. How about if the value 10 went in there? We'd have a problem, he says. And he says, so we want to create our own data type because the data types we've used so far don't really support this situation. It says an integer can be many different values, but for the day action, we only want to use 0 through 7 or 1 through 8. He's using 0 through 7. So he says we're going to get some crazy values. This is going to be a problem. We also want to assign meaningful value names. So he says if we have something like current action equals 4, that's not so meaningful. So it's not very clear which day action 4 refers to. This could also lead us to problems. So integers are useful, but they're limited, and making them safe will be kind of tricky. Fortunately, VB has an easy solution for such situations. We can make our own custom data type called an enumeration. So skipping a few slides ahead, here's the enumeration. It's just a custom variable called day action. You define it like this: public enumeration, or enum. Give it the name you want. You say it's of integer type, and you end it here. And then you say 0 stands for this, 1 stands for this, 2 stands for this, and so on. And he gives a few points here. First of all, note that we define it outside of our Form 1 class definition, just beneath it. So you can see here's the end of the class, and we're going to define it down here. Notice that we use the public keyword as well. Also, he says here, each value has 2 representations: an integer, 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, and a string, asleep, getting ready for work, traveling, and so on. In Form 1, declare the current state. So we declare current. So the type of variable is called a day action variable. We're creating a new type of variable. It's not the variable. We're not creating the variable here. It's a type of variable. Then, once we have that type, just like we have integer types and we have doubles and we have strings and so on, we have now another type called day action. Then we're going to create a new instance of that type of variable, a new example of that type of variable, and that's called current state. So in class 1, declare current state a class level variable, so it's class level. It's not declared inside a method. A class level variable for holding a day action value. It's not holding an integer, it's holding a day action value. Note we are not declaring our variable inside any method, therefore it's more persistent. So that just means, remember, if you declare it inside of a method, and as soon as that method is finished running, that variable will, so to speak, die. We'll lose control or contact with it. Okay, so it's more persistent. We're using public instead of dim. So normally we would use dim, but here in this case we use public, and we'll discuss more on methods next. As usual, we use the as operator to specify our new type. Okay, so here's the example. Now let's go back a few slides and see what he says here. So we just finished with this slide before, and now here we are. So defining custom enumerations. Enumerations allow you to build a new custom data type in an enumeration block. So this is the enumeration block, using a subset of one of the VB primitive data types. So this is one of the so-called primitive data types. It's not one that we're creating. It's kind of native to the system, so it calls it a primitive data type. It's already there. Integer, long, short, byte, and so on. It says no floats are allowed when you're creating an enumeration. Each valid value is then listed in the enum block as a unique string. So here are the strings, the unique strings. Along with the corresponding integer value, any order is okay. So you don't have to do it in numeric order here. Basically, you are defining a map or an association between the string and the integer values. Once defined, you can declare a variable of that type. So once we finish doing this, then we can declare, like we did, what was it called again? It's called current state. So we can declare a variable of that type, like current state. And VB will respect, only let that variable take your defined value. So it will only let it take on these values. To define it, so just like when we have like a Boolean variable, which means like a just true-false variable, a VB only allows that to take on the values true and false. This is only allowed to take on this set of values. To define an enumeration, use this VB syntax. Note, you must list each name as a VB string on a separate line. However, you are not required to pick integer values. And what he means by that is non-assigned string values. So if you don't give a value to this particular string, VB will automatically give it an integer value. In this case, integer value. Okay, let's go to the next screen. So let's get on with our day action project. A program called day action that accepts the time of day, an hour, and predicts a current day action for a given person based on that time. Our targets allowed day action will include 8 activity states: asleep, getting ready for work, traveling to work, at work, lunch, and so on. We will define and use an enumerated data type to keep track of and predict Albert's actions given the time of day. Okay, so we're going to implement our enumeration. So first of all, we want to put a form control, what's it called? A track bar on our form, and also a text box on our form. So the track bar, you can find that in the list of controls, and then of course you can put a text box at the bottom. So introducing the track bar control, the slider. The tick marks indicate a range of values from low left to high right. The slider, or thumb, that's this thing, indicates the position. The slider position corresponds to the current value, and we have the minimum track bar value and the maximum track bar value are both properties of the track bar. You'll see that. And it's used to control the values of a discrete variable. Remember, discrete for our purposes right now, let's say that discrete just means like a variable that only has a finite number of possible values. Okay, so like typically time is not exactly finite because it can be any time between, even between 1 second and the next, there's, an infinite number of possibilities, right? So there's an infinite number of possible values, maybe for a variable like time, but we saw in our enumeration, we're only going to have 8 different values. That would definitely be called a discrete variable because there's a finite number of values. Mathematically, they have a slightly different definition, but I'll just say it's finite for right now. If you care, just check it out on the internet. What's the difference between discrete and continuous variable? Okay, so now we set the properties. So for the text box, the name is going to be txt state, and the name for the track box is going to be trk hours. You're going to set the minimum property equal to 0 and the maximum property equal to 23, and the value is going to be set to 0. So do all of those, set all of those properties and this property, and let's go on. Okay, so we just went over this slide already. Okay, so let's continue. So just to review though, we declared one instance of our day action up here, and we did it inside Form1 class, right? Okay, let's go on. Okay, now we want to create a new event handler, just like we have button click event handlers. Now we want another one, and what we want is, of course, when we put code in the button click handler, then when the button is pressed, the code will run. Now we want, as soon as the form opens, as soon as we load the form, we want some code to run. So that is going to be in form.1 load event handler. So the way that you, of course, to add code to the button click handler, you double click on the button. To add code to the load event handler, or the form load event handler, you just double click on the form itself, not on any button or any other special control on the form, but just on the form itself, and it will add this thing here, private sub form1 load. This is the load event handler. So whatever you put inside this is code that will run as soon as the form opens up. So one thing that we want to do as soon as the form opens up